Good afternoon. Well, as you know, I've just returned from Western Australia, where I joined Australian Prime Minister Tony Abbott to mark the 100th anniversary of Anzac troops departing for World War I. New Zealand and Australia share a unique and close heritage. We have stood together in times of war and helped each other in times of disaster. It was an honour to attend the commemoration and acknowledge the long-standing Anzac partnership, and to remember the many New Zealanders and Australians who served and continue to serve our nation so bravely. While in Australia, I met with Prime Minister Abbott, where we discussed a range of issues, including developments in Iraq and Syria, Ebola and TPP. We also touched on preparations for Australia's hosting of the G20 in Brisbane later this month. New Zealand's relationship with Australia is as close now as it's ever been, so it was good to hear Prime Minister Abbott's views on these issues. The trip to Australia marks the start of what is going to be a busy international period for me. Next week I travel to China and Myanmar to attend the APEC Leaders Meeting and the East Asian Summit. Our largest trading partners will also be at these summits, so they'll provide a great opportunity to promote New Zealand as a good place to do business and invest in. It'll also allow us to get a better sense of the key challenges facing our major partners. I return home on Friday before heading to Australia on Saturday for the G20, which will provide me with another opportunity to meet with leaders from some of our closest trading partners. Before I head overseas, I'll be giving a national security speech in Wellington on Wednesday. As you know, national security is not a topic that I regularly give speeches on, but the changing environment and the challenges in front of us mean that now is the right time for me to do that. On Wednesday, you can expect to see me outline more details of the foreign fighters issue as it relates to New Zealand, as well as what the government plans to do about it. I'll also outline at a high level the options in front of the government as we consider what form a New Zealand contribution to the international effort against ISIS might take. I know you'll all want me to outline more of that today. I can't really do that in any great specific details. That will come on Wednesday. My office will be giving you details of the speech so you can attend. The speech itself will be released publicly, of course. In terms of the House this week, the government will progress a number of first readings on the order paper, including the Police Cost Recovery Amendment Bill and the Organised Crime and Anti-Corruption Legislation Bill. On Wednesday morning, we've extended ours to progress 3 treaty bills. Wednesday afternoon is a Members' Day. Finally, in terms of my own activity this week, I'll be in the House for question time tomorrow and Wednesday as usual. As I said, I'll be making a national security speech in Wellington on Wednesday, and on Thursday I have visits in Christchurch, and on Friday I'll be in Auckland.
On breakfast this morning, Prime Minister, you signalled that you supported a ban on private sale of fireworks. Have you done any work on that? Is that just a personal view?
Look, no, the government I don't think has done any serious work about that issue, but obviously it's an issue that raises its head every time we have Guy Fawkes. And I think if you look at what's happening, there's been a progression towards more public displays and a higher degree of recognition of the need for safety and the impact that private fireworks have on animals, potentially on people's health and safety and the fire risk that they present. And while I'm not proposing saying that there should be a personal ban today, what I would say is I think the evolutionary path towards that point is coming, and I think eventually you actually will see public displays being the ones where fireworks are available.
Why not ban it today?
Well, you could do. I think it's something that you'd rather take the public with us, and I think slowly there is a bow wave of agreement that that's the right place to go. We don't want to take away the last bit of fun that people have, but in reality they do present a risk both to, I think, property, to pets and to personal safety.
Are you worried that you might be accused of being a bit nanny-state if you take that right away?
Yeah, possibly, but I mean, I think it'll naturally evolve in there anyway.
Prime Minister, the latest IS or ISIS massacre has involved the killing of 322 members at one tribe and 50 bodies put down a water well. What do you make of this latest massacre by IS? Have you caught on it?
Well, for quite some time now, I've been trying to give, I think, people a sense of how both dangerous, brutal and ugly IS is as a group of terrorists. And I think you can see that through the public beheadings that have taken place. You can see it through the brutality of this most recent massacre, and you can see their reach around the world. And my own view is that these people present one of the more significant threats in modern times, primarily because they're very well organised and they're very well New Zealanders will be able to see lots of different signals coming out to support that threat risk. So on the weekend you saw young children potentially being paid significant amounts of money to undertake terrorist threats. We've had this massacre that's taken place. On Wednesday we will be giving you better details around the number of domestic people looking to either leave or become associated as foreign fighters, so we'll be able to frame up that issue a little bit more for you. And as I've been saying publicly for some time, I think the number will be at the area where it'll surprise some New Zealanders.
Sure, and just on your speech on Wednesday, I know you don't want to give too much away, but obviously you won't be making a decision, we haven't made a decision at Cabinet today about what New Zealand's contribution will be.
There's two parts of the speech. So if we take the first part around foreign fighters, what I can say is that, as you will recall, we went away to look and see if there were deficiencies in the legislation, and if so, what response would be required. What I can tell you is there are deficiencies in our view in the current legislative settings, so there will be a response that's required. We will be taking quite a narrow and defined view, so we haven't tried to throw everything into that, because we want, with our strong preferences, that other political parties will support us. There will be a select committee process that we'll go through, but we are going to try and pass the legislation as rapidly as we can. And overall, there will be also a sunset clause in the changes that we're making to reflect the fact that there's a wider security review taking place in a number of areas starting early next year. But in the foreign fighters issue, there will be recommendations that we'll be making that we believe the government should pass. The second part of that sits around our response to ISIS, and I think what you will get a flavour for on Wednesday is where we think the line of contribution might be. So in other words, what we think would make sense and what we might think doesn't make sense. It obviously spans a range of areas, right through from humanitarian aid to potentially military contribution. And within those categories, you'll see us working our way carefully through what our thought process is.
But no decision.
No decision.
Well, you'll have a pretty clear pathway of the road that we intend to travel.
Why not just give us a firm decision that this is what you're going to do?
Some of the situation is evolving in Iraq, and one of the things actually that came out in the weekend talking to Tony Abbott is just how much this position is actually unfolding in front of everybody. So if you look at all of the countries, and I've looked at a matrix, sort of like spreadsheet of what their involvement is varied, it's slightly changing, it's all a bit different everywhere. And some of the initiatives that people are talking about don't actually have the sign up of the Iraqi government yet. People haven't actually sat down and said they absolutely want these things. So it's not possible for me to be absolutely crystal clear in terms of being definitive that we're doing something, but I can be quite definitive about where I think that line sits from a New Zealand perspective.
Be able to be definitive?
You'll have to wait till Wednesday. It'll make a bit more sense when you see it on Wednesday.
So you've talked about the number of people who might...
Leaders there.
Sorry, one more time.
Are you waiting to go to the G20 to get first-hand chats with
No,
leaders?
you'll see in the speech what the trigger is, but it's not the G20.
Do you still draw a distinction between Iraq and Syria as far as New Zealand involvement goes?
Yeah, I think that would be a fair distinction. As a general review, and I guess it's slightly changing with the new administration in Iraq, but the responses so far have been at the request of the Iraqi government, and we're now working through what their next requests and desires might be.
So
Syria is quite different.
Sorry, so we're not in a situation where you're contemplating some New Zealand involvement in Syria?
Correct.
So basically at the moment you've got a situation where you talk about a number of foreign fighters, people who want to go and join the fight. I mean, what's your sense of the number of people in New Zealand who may support Islamic State without actually wanting to leave the country?
Yeah, so within that category of foreign fighters, what you'll see is a definition around the number of people we think are a very credible risk, and they're at varying different stages. And they are people that either want to leave the country and be foreign fighters, or they are people that are financially supporting that cause. Then you'll see again a bit of a definition of what we think is the number of people currently in Syria and Iraq actually fighting alongside ISIS. And then you'll see us define another group where we don't have enough information to be sure, but we have seen some indication that there could be people of interest.
So what? So you mentioned financial support. I mean, what can you tell us about that? What level of, fundraising that's going on here in New Zealand for Islamic State?
We might be in a bit better position to outline that for you on Wednesday, but what you can be sure of is that there are people in New Zealand, in our view, who are actively raising money for ISIS.
Do you think that, you mentioned that people would be surprised at the number of people who were wanting to be foreign fighters, would we be surprised at the number of people who are fundraising here too?
Because they sit within the broad overall category, I think so, yes.
Prime Minister, so you will go to the G20 without a decision either way on whether we make a military contribution to the fight against ISIS?
I really actively encourage you to listen to the speech on Wednesday. I think when you see it, you'll see that we're doing all the things that we've actually said that we would do. We've been very careful about our thought process. We've been quite cautious in the steps that we're taking. We've got a plan for where we think a contribution might make sense, and we've got a sense of where the line sits of what we either are comfortable with or not comfortable with. So, yes, there are some trigger points that you'll see in that speech, but we won't need to go to the G20 to do that. We've got a sense from ourselves and our own work that we've been doing about what contribution we might want to make.
Will your response include looking at further diplomatic initiatives? And I said, you talked about how well resourced Islamic State is, and it's known that a number of governments in that region, while maybe publicly speaking against them, are seen to be actually financially supporting them for whatever political reason.
Yeah.
So I mean, how much does that figure in the response?
Well, there's no question in my mind that if you want to solve the situation in Iraq, that the most powerful way of achieving that is actually through politics and diplomacy. I mean, in the end, you have to get the particular warring factions to agree, and that's a breakdown of the sectarian response that's been the hallmark of the Maliki government, and hopefully is something will be addressed by the Barday administration. So ultimately, there's no question that politics and diplomacy is an important part of it. And I'd sort of see that there's, in broad terms, 4 categories of areas that we are considering our response in, and they are humanitarian aid, they are the area of diplomacy, they sit in the area of probably intelligence gathering, and also potentially other military sort of hardware, if you like, the sort of airlift capability type things we've talked about in the past. And then there's more the kind of individual people from a military perspective in these 4 categories.
So, Prime Minister, on the diplomacy category, what could New Zealand realistically do there in terms of adding something to that area?
Yeah, so you better to wait till Wednesday. We'll spell that reasonably clearly for you.
Have you been put under any pressure or had any questions and have been asked for anything from the US or Australia on this? I mean, have they communicated with you about what you're going to do?
In the case of the United States, no. In the case of Australia, we haven't been put under any pressure, but we certainly got a very clear indication of where Australia's going and what they're doing, and I've had a couple of discussions with Tony Abbott about that, and we had a firm and frank discussion on Friday night. So, I think each country understands its responses, but there isn't a situation where Australia's trying to put us under pressure. There's just a discussion of what Australia's doing vis-a-vis what New Zealand might do.
So on the invite from the Iraqi government, has there been any discussion between the Iraqi government and New Zealand in terms of?
Well, I'm not aware of that, but there probably are discussions with our diplomatic people in the region of what's going on. But I think that situation of what might best suit the administration is something they're working through with the United States and other countries. It's certainly, I know, something that Australia's been working on.
Because in terms of getting the authority, it took Australia, they had to send their foreign minister in. Would we get our own authority, or would we go in, for instance, under an umbrella, on Australia's coattails, for want of a better description?
Yeah, so you raised the right point, which is Australia has had to dispatch Julie Bishop to Baghdad to resolve the position of their SAS troops and their entry into Iraq. I suspect anything we might do might be a bit easier to navigate, but let's wait and see.
I took
Mr.
what you said before.
Has there been any approaches from nations that we are friendly with or are associated with to give advice or make requests of us in terms of the restrictions that you want to impose?
I'm pretty sure the answer to that's no, but I'd have to check that.
Because Because I know obviously Canada's made some moves in this area, the EU has made some strong representations about wanting to control foreign fighters. There's been no diplomatic approaches for a concerted...
Look, I can't be 100% sure of any discussions that would happen with the MFAT, and obviously we've been looking at the UN Security Council resolution in this area, but I personally haven't had any requests, but I can't be 100% sure what the MFAT's had.
I took from what you said before that Iraq's changed its request or its implication to the international community about what it wants. Is that
I think
right?
it's slightly
If so,
changed.
how?
Its government has really been the issue. I mean,
okay.
Malaki's gone, Abadi's come in, so the position's slightly changing in there. But broadly, I think the request is still there for support. It's the question of, again, from their perspective, where the line should be drawn of that support.
How do you see that's changed?
Well, it's changed in one form because you've got to remember in the case of Maliki, I mean, he didn't have any Sunni representation in his cabinet. As I understand it, Abadi, I think, is defence minister as a Sunni, so it is quite different in there. And he is starting to reach out and recognise between, I think, the Kurds, the Shiites and Sunnis, there has to be, for want of a better term, more agreement around a power sharing agreement. Now, they might phrase it in a slightly different way, but certainly he is recognising that if there's any hope of holding Iraq together, it has to happen by the parties at least feeling as though the government has some representation of their interests.
As part of your decision-making processes, are you considering setting conditions, even if you keep them to yourself, of the when an exit would be preferable, when an end point?
I mean, obviously we give serious consideration to those issues of how long any involvement would have us there if we chose to do something. I think what I would say is that experience tells you that once you commit, if you do commit resources to a region like Iraq, in reality you're there for quite a long period of time. So it's easy for people to say, look, it's 18 months or it's 3 years or whatever, but as we know with our involvement in Bamyan, it ultimately was a lot longer than people probably thought. And even now we still have some people providing training along with the Brits. So look, in the end, I think you've got to expect it could potentially be for a reasonably significant period of time if we do something.
Will our diplomatic involvement though involve trying to put pressure on other governments in the region that are seen to be trying to make political gain out of the conflict in Iraq and Syria?
Well, our diplomats in the region, I think, do spend time talking to all of those administrations about what we think is a viable long-term solution for peace and harmony in the Middle East. And that is the kind of conversation that we have with those governments. And I'm sure that would continue.
Have you received any advice from the Inspector General of Intelligence and Security about the release of the Slater OIA report?
I haven't, no.
When are you expecting to get it?
Well, I wasn't a party to that, so I'm pretty sure I don't know what's in the report. I don't know what state the report's in, whether she's finished it or not. And I'm pretty sure I won't get a copy of the report because I'm not a party to it, so I simply don't know the answer.
When you say I, do you mean you or your office?
Well, some members of my office are, but I'm not personally.
So do you expect TPP talks to be progressed at APEC or EAS in due to effect?
Without doubt, there'll be discussions because I want to have those discussions with President Obama and others, and taking a lead from what happened with the ministers' meeting in Australia. I think there is momentum starting to build and a sense of a timetable of when a deal could actually be reached. So I'm not sure if there'll be any formal discussions when we're in APEC. I certainly haven't seen them on the agenda yet, but they are the sorts of things that can happen quite late. If they're not formal, then informally definitely there'll be discussions.
How far off, I mean, what are we talking about in terms of the deal being progressed? How far away are we?
Well, if you think that President Obama has a couple of years on the clock to run, he's really got a window of opportunity probably in the next 6 months or so. I would have thought, by about the middle of next year, if we haven't got a deal done, it's going to become harder. Not impossible, but harder. So I think there's a window where we'll have to push hard in early next year.
Is there any sense that TPP is not on the formal agenda because China's not part of it and it's pushing RCEP and isn't interested in having that dominate or overshadow anything about APEC?
Well, no, typically, I don't think I can ever recall TPP being on the formal agenda for APEC, but what has happened in the margins of APEC, there have been TPP leaders' meetings. So there are a subgroup of some of the players clearly that are there, but because not all of them are involved, it's not on the main agenda. There generally is a bit of a discussion about the wider issues of trade, but they tend to sit around interventions where people talk about RCEP and TPP and or WTO.
Yeah, in Singapore and others, there haven't been an official TPP meeting on the agenda because it's not part of APEC, but there has been an official TPP meeting that we've known about days in advance.
Correct.
And that you chaired in one case.
That's right, and that's what I'm saying. Is it, well, I haven't seen any notification that that is going to happen yet, but nor have I seen people saying it definitely won't. And quite often those things happen a bit late in the piece, so I think it's possible, but I haven't had any advice that it's going to happen.
Will you get to sit down with Obama?
I'll look, whether I sit down with him, end up talking to him at dinner or whatever. Look, we'll have plenty of discussions. I'm confident that.
Will any of the hope for international leader visits around the APEC and G20, have any of them been finalised and agreed to yet?
Yes, and we hope to be in a position by the middle of this week to give you a sense of some of those visits.
How many have you got lined up?
We'll give you some of those details, I think, Wednesday.
Why is it taking so long? The Australians announced theirs last week.
I think it's just the negotiations we're having with the countries. I think we've got agreement with them, but for some reason, don't ask me why, November the 5th seems to be the day that everyone tells.
Is it anything to do with the trigger Prime Minister?
Don't think so, no.
On the State House sale proceeds, would the government commit to recycling all of those into social housing or rebuilding housing?
So I think firstly, if you have a look at social housing, where the government is trying to go as a fundamental sort of backdrop of this whole initiative is to increase the amount of social housing or Housing New Zealand housing provided to the most vulnerable families. So the question isn't about reducing the amount of housing, the question is about how do we more rapidly provide more housing. We've made no secret of the fact that we think the mix at the moment between social housing providers and the Housing New Zealand is wrong in the sense it's almost all skewed towards Housing New Zealand with a very small contribution from social housing providers. So some months, I think a year or so ago, Nick Smith actually gave a speech when he said he thought about 20% of housing in this area could be social housing. And that could occur by obviously building and doing more. So there are a number of factors that need to be considered. What happens to any resources that might be released as a result of the sale of houses? Who could actually buy those houses? What form might it take? And the likes. And all I can tell you is we're not in a position to detail all of that today. But over the course of the next few weeks, I think we will be in a position to give you a sense of the program, how it's going to work, what the parameters guiding it are, and what you can expect to see over the course of the next 3 years.
Do you think the opposition's claims that you should have been more detailed before the election are fair?
Well, I think it's a lovely idea, and I would have been desperate to speak about it in the entire 5 weeks or 6 weeks of the election campaign, but quite frankly there wasn't virtually a single day we were talking about policy that anyone was interested in it. So no, the opposition wanted to talk about Cameron Slater and dirty politics and Julian Assange and Mega.com and Kim.com and a mountain of other things, but they didn't want to talk about policy. So, okay. Secondly, we have actually been making it quite clear that we do want to have more social housing. And actually, by way of context, it's worth remembering, I mean, if you think last year alone, we sold 800 state houses. So state house sales happen on a very regular basis, and they actually have for a long period of time. Partly that reflects what the issue is that we have, in some cases, too much housing in areas where it's not required and not enough in others where it is. The system's not fast enough to respond. And the other big problem we've got is that there is a really big advantage to someone that's in a Housing New Zealand home currently receiving an income-related rent and someone who's not. So that makes a materially massive difference to those households. But what we want to do is make sure that more people can have that income-related rent. And the question is what's the fastest way of achieving that?
What's the government's reaction to the UN report on climate change?
First thing I'd say is that we do take climate change seriously. We've got an emissions trading scheme, we are investing heavily in science, and we are committed to the negotiations and process that takes place. I'm not surprised by the overall findings that I've very briefly seen, which is that greenhouse gases are rising quite rapidly. That would concur with the advice I get from my chief science advisor. I think the challenge here for all of us as we work through the various meetings that will take place, including in Paris, is to actually reach a solution which all countries developing and developed can buy into. Because in the end, I've always believed it's a global problem that requires a global solution.
The Greens say that the Ministry for the Environment is predicting a 50% increase in greenhouse gas emissions over the next
From
decade.
New Zealand.
Yeah, and
Yep.
how does that line up with what the government is doing?
There's a million ways to cut the numbers, but and I haven't seen their comments or all of them, but from what I can see broadly at the moment, we are largely on track. The challenge for New Zealand actually comes when you have deforestation, which will take place as you harvest some of those trees, and the way that that's measured. So it depends, they may be trying to pick sort of the worst point at which that actually happens. I mean, overall, all I can say is we're about 0.15% of world emissions. I reckon we've got the country set on about the right track. You haven't seen a single fossil fuel electricity power plant established in the 6 years that we've been in the government. But look, in the end, New Zealanders know that to get a solution to climate change is going to take a lot more than New Zealand wanting that to happen. It's going to take the big emitting countries to hold hands and actually step up and do something about it.
You raised dinner when you were talking about Barack Obama before. You're expecting a private dinner with the President?
When we go to APEC, I'd be amazed if that was the case. I mean, I haven't actually had a really good look through my own schedule yet, but I'm pretty sure in terms of APEC, there's a big gala dinner, and I don't think there's much other time that's terribly free. So no, I wouldn't expect dinner, but look, we'll have plenty of time to have a chat.
You said after the election that you'd asked your officials for a look at measures to address child poverty.
Yep.
What's the current progress?
Yeah, so we had actually some discussions about that at Cabinet today. We're making progress in terms of that issue. One of the things we'll want to do for you is actually define the group of youngsters and families that we're talking about, because there's many definitions out there. And I think you can expect to see us make some progress over time.
Well, when you make that comment, wouldn't it be helpful to have some accepted measure of child poverty that everyone would then work to?
You could do, but I mean, one of the risks you run is that we could give you one perspective on what that number should be, and it won't stop lots of people using lots of other numbers. So it partly depends on what deprivation index they use. There are multiple different factors. That someone is materially poor doesn't necessarily mean that they're always vulnerable. Their vulnerability could come from everything from sexual, physical or verbal abuse, and they may not necessarily be kids who are necessarily poor. So there's lots of different groups and definitions in there, and we could spend a long time being hung up on those definitions. I think what's better for us is to say to the public, look, here's a group of youngsters that we have in our sights that we're trying to do something for specifically. That doesn't exclude all of the others, because there's a group of young people who sit within that vulnerable group we've been both doing a lot of work on and achieving some quite good results with over the course of the last 6 years. And they're the group that have seen everything from more social workers in schools right through to a group that will benefit from free doctors' visits.
Should you make a child poverty measure one of your best public services targets?
Look, there's been some discussion on that, but again, I really want to see the emphasis, and this is what I've told the officials. I want to see some results, and measurable results in areas that will make a material difference to those children. That's what our focus is, and spending a lot of time, talking about how you're going to measure all of those things, if you like, the measurement of the measurement is kind of not necessarily going to achieve the biggest result.
So do you accept that the children of beneficiaries are more likely to be vulnerable than others in society?
Vulnerable or poor?
Vulnerable.
I think the academic research would support the view that beneficiary children are more likely to be vulnerable, but there are many exceptions to the rule. And when children live in welfare-based homes, that's a very fluid situation. Many people go on and off benefits for a variety of different reasons. I'd hate to send the message to a youngster that because they grow up with a parent or parents that are in welfare, that somehow that is going to determine their life. Because I would sort of make the case, well, if that's the message you want to send, then I'm the very kid you're talking about. That's a kind of, it would be a very negative argument. But certainly the academic research supports the view that youngsters in very low income homes where there's intergenerational welfare dependency are more likely to turn up on the various different measures of vulnerability that we see in society.
So do you accept the argument that's been advanced that you should focus on beneficiaries and their children, rather than focusing on getting beneficiaries into work?
Well, the way I would look at that is that if you accept that the outcomes are better for children that come from working parents, by definition, if you move those parents into work, then actually you fix both of those issues. It's not quite as straightforward and as simple as that. And actually, when it comes to slight material deprivation, we also know that some people can fit that category and be working. But I mean, overall, the government's response to the work that we're doing in this area, I don't think is going to shock people. Our fundamental view is that if you can work, you should work, and if you do work, you're much more likely to be materially better off.
But
the question is, how do we make that happen?
In the past, you've rejected extending the in-work family credit to beneficiaries. In the budget last year, you didn't extend the assistance for newborns to beneficiaries' children. On the very argument that you still wanted to maintain the gap between the two.
That's right.
Do you accept that perhaps you should have moved further in the beneficiary area in those cases?
No, I think that it's hugely important that there is a real incentive for people to move off welfare and into work. And actually, if you look at the entitlements that come for state entitlements from welfare-based homes, they are obviously by definition much greater than the ones that go to a working family that get the in-work tax credit. So they're far more likely, for instance, to get a bigger accommodation supplement and all sorts of other initiatives, income-related rents and the likes. So we've had a bit of a look at those numbers, and we've asked our officials to profile for us, what is the after-tax income of a variety of different families looking at a variety of different circumstances. And what it shows you is that while the in-work tax credit is one factor, by far the biggest resource going into those families is determined around whether they get income-related rents and bigger accommodation supplements. So it's one of the reasons why we're very focused on getting more people getting income-related rents. So to put a bit of perspective on it, if you look at the work that Brian Perry's been doing for MSD, what he show you is that over the course of the last probably 30 years, people have gone from spending between about 25 to 30% of their income on housing to about 50%. So that's why even if they're working, if they're living, for instance, in Auckland or Wellington or Christchurch, they can still be spending an awful lot of their income supporting their mortgage or on their rent. And what income-related rents does, of course, is ensure that they spend no more than a quarter of their income on housing, and it puts them in a far stronger financial position. That's why I think once we distill down the actual fact from the fiction of what's happening in our response to social housing, the reason that'll be welcomed by people is the one thing the government will do is it'll make sure more people get IRR, more people get income-related rents, and when they do that, mark my words, their income will be considerably better off. And the cost of the government providing that, as I said, I think over the weekend, is a fraction of us building more state houses. So for 1,000 people to support them in income-related rents costs us $12 million. To build 1,000 new state homes costs us $500 million. So we've got the fastest way of us moving those people out of poverty is to deliver more income-related rents.
So what sort of scale are you looking at for increasing the number of people on the income rate?
Well, they're all the sorts of questions you legitimately ask and we need to answer for you, but we can't do that today. That's what we're working through over the course of the next few weeks.
Boris Johnson is calling for a bilateral mobility zone between the UK, Australia, and apparently New Zealand as well. Is that something you'd lobby for?
Yeah, it's something we greatly welcome, and we would, if I understand what he's saying, and would be consistent with what he told us when we were there, which is essentially the Boris Johnson view of the world is that New Zealand and Australia have been strong contributors to the growth of Britain and its success, and that we're being caught up in the overall immigration debate from the EU and the impact it's having on Britain, and that we're being unfairly discriminated against. That's his broad view, and I think that's the basis of the argument he's making there.
Given the way the immigration debate seems to be going in Britain and the rise of the UK Independence Party, how much hope do you have that this could come to fruition anytime soon?
I'm really sceptical. I mean, it's the biggest political issue in the United Kingdom is essentially immigration. You can see that, as you quite correctly pointed out, in the rise of UKIP. They've got a general election in May next year, and I challenging to see much progress in that area.
Peter Gluckman said over the weekend that the government should look at potentially sugar taxes to address childhood obesity. What's your view?
As a general rule, we've been opposed. As you're aware, Peter is chairing the World Health Organization Committee on Obesity, and I've said to him he should feel free to make any comments that he wants, because actually he offers free and frank and independent advice, and by the way, he wears a number of hats. The problem I think though with the sugar taxes is that what would it take for them to be successful, and how far reaching would they have to be? And I think the answers, the problem you come back to is that, you wouldn't just have to move the bottle of Coke by 10 or 20 cents. And what do you do about sugar that's used in lots of products that people would support, from jam to, I don't know, apple pies? So it's just not as simple as it sounds. But in the end, what the government's response to obesity is around both A, education, so there's the 5-star rating, and B, the work that we're going to continue to do with Jonathan Common, which is why I gave him sport and health as 2 portfolios to sit alongside each other. Okay, thanks so much.